My life was simple, a series of quiet moments spent working in a small cafe where the scent of coffee and the hum of conversations brought me peace. Every day was predictable, and I found solace in the routine. But that peace was shattered the day he walked into the cafe. I remember it vividly. He was tall, with an imposing presence that seemed to draw all the air out of the room. His eyes were cold, calculating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was sizing me up. Beside him stood a little girl, her hand tightly clutching his. Her eyes, in contrast to his, were filled with a strange mixture of hope and longing. She looked up at me, and without a second thought, she called out, "Mama!" My heart skipped a beat. I froze, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. I didn't know this man or the child, but the way she looked at me, with such innocent expectation, made something deep inside me twist with unease. He barely acknowledged me, his silence heavy with unspoken judgment. They left as quietly as they had arrived, but something about the encounter lingered in my mind, a sense of foreboding that I couldn't shake. The next day, as I was walking home, a black van appeared out of nowhere. My heart pounded with dread as masked men stormed in, grabbing me with rough hands and dragging me into the van. My screams echoed through the empty streets, but no one heard me. When I awoke, I found myself in a grand, unfamiliar mansion. Daniel, the man from the cafe, stood before me, his eyes cold and unyielding. "You will marry me," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. It wasn't a request, it was an order. Lily cried the whole night asking for her mama. She thought you were her mama, so I brought you here. I stared at him, disbelief and fear battling within me. "You can't do this," I whispered, my voice trembling. But his response was as chilling as the man himself. "You don't have a choice," Daniel said, his tone turning even colder. "If you refuse, you'll be killed, and no one will ever find your body." The threat was clear, and in that moment, I knew my life was no longer my own. From that day on, I became his puppet, forced to obey his every command under the constant shadow of death. I became a prisoner in his mansion, living as Lily's mother. Daniel showed no interest in me, speaking only when necessary. His mother, who had moved into the mansion, was cruel beyond measure. "Clara," his mother would sneer, "you're nothing. Don't think for a moment that you belong here." She took pleasure in belittling me, making every day a living hell. Her words cut deep, but I had no choice but to endure. Amid this misery, only Lily, a little girl, offered me any solace. But Lily was stubborn, much like her father. She was determined to possess whatever she needed, and would cry and demand it until she got her way. One of her most persistent demands was for a baby brother. "Mama, I want a baby brother," she would plead, her voice filled with hope and frustration. Cries were heartbreaking, a constant reminder of the pressure I faced. Daniel's patience wore thin. One night, he came to my room and said, "You should make a baby brother for Lily." His tone was as cold as ever. His words a command rather than a suggestion. I felt like a mere vessel, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. The nights that followed were cold and loveless, Daniel's touch nothing more than a duty. I felt hollow, but there was no escape from his demands. I had become his puppet, a lifeless doll in a cruel game. When Sarah returned, everything changed. With her striking beauty and affluent background, she quickly reclaimed her place in the household. Sarah, Lily's biological mother, had left after a bitter argument with Daniel when Lily was just a baby. Her return was warmly welcomed by Daniel's mother, who treated her as the true mistress of the house. At first, Daniel kept his distance. She was relentless, showering him with affection and rekindling the remnants of their past romance. Gradually, his coldness began to thaw, and I watched in silent despair as he gravitated back toward her. The love they once shared, buried beneath years of bitterness, started to resurface, pushing me further into the shadows. Sarah wasted no time in asserting her place, showering Lily with gifts and affection. "Lily, look what I brought you," she would say, her voice dripping with sweetness as she handed the little girl yet another toy or treat. Each gift pulled Lily further away from me, eroding the fragile bond we had built. As Sarah's influence grew, Daniel's mother became even more ruthless. One day, she cornered me, her voice low and threatening. "If you don't stay away from Lily," she hissed, "I'll tell her the truth. You're not her real mother." Her threat loomed over me like a dark cloud. I knew that if Lily learned the truth, our bond would be destroyed. But I was powerless, trapped in a life I couldn't control. Then, in a cruel twist, Daniel's mother took matters into her own hands. As I was playing with Lily one day, she called the little girl over, her voice sweet, false. "Lily, darling," she said, "Clara isn't your real mom. Sarah is. She's come back to be with you." Lily's eyes widened in shock, her gaze darting between me and the woman who had just shattered her world. My heart broke as I saw the confusion and pain in her eyes. Lily ran to me, tears streaming down her face, and asked, "Mama, is it true? Are you not my real mom?" I wanted to protect her, but I couldn't lie. "No, Lily," I whispered, my own tears falling. "I'm not your real mom." The truth hit her hard. "You lied to me," she screamed, pulling away from me. "I hate you." Sarah was there in an instant, pulling Lily into her arms, soothing her with sweet words. I knew then that I had lost her. The bond we had shared was broken, and there was no way to fix it. My presence in the mansion became nothing more than a shadow. Even Lily, who had once clung to me, now turned away whenever I tried to approach her. The house, once my prison, now became a place where I was invisible and unwanted. But just as I thought things couldn't get worse, Daniel delivered the final blow. One evening, he handed me a set of divorce papers, his expression as cold as ever. "Your duty is over," he said flatly. "Sign these and you can leave." His words were like a knife to my heart, but there was no emotion in his voice, no hint of regret or sadness. He handed me a check, final payment for the life he had forced me to live. With a trembling hand, I signed the papers, my heart heavy with sorrow. I left the check on the table in my room. Then I packed my belongings and left the mansion, knowing that I had been discarded like a piece of trash. As if the cruelty of my life wasn't enough, fate had one more twist in store for me. While I was walking away from the mansion, I collapsed, overcome with pain. The doctor's diagnosis was harsh. I was pregnant. The child I carried was a constant reminder of the man I had come to despise. The realization filled me with despair. Yet I knew that this child was a part of me, a new life growing inside me despite the darkness that had surrounded its conception. I couldn't go back to the mansion, nor could I return to my hometown with a child. So I fled, finding refuge in a small village far away. I took a job at a little cafe, much like the one where my story had begun, and tried to build a new life. Every day I worked quietly, serving customers and trying to forget the past. The baby growing inside me was a constant reminder of the life I had left behind. Despite the pain and betrayal, I knew I had to keep going. This child deserved a better life, a life filled with love and hope. Months later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. He was the spitting image of Daniel, his handsome features a constant reminder of the life I had tried to escape. But I loved him fiercely, determined to give him a life free from the shadows that had haunted me. Months passed. I lived a peaceful and contented life with my baby. But then, a suspicious man started frequenting the cafe. He always sat in the corner, watching me with an unsettling intensity. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that danger was lurking just around the corner. One quiet evening, as I sat alone with my son, the door of the cafe opened, and a figure stepped inside. My heart stopped when I saw Daniel standing there, his eyes locked on mine. "I never lost track of you," he said, his voice as chilling as ever. "Did you really think you could escape me?" My blood ran cold as I realized the truth. Daniel had been watching me all along, keeping tabs on every move I made. The man in the cafe had been his spy, reporting back to him everything I did. "And now," Daniel continued, his gaze shifting to the sleeping baby in my arms, "I've come to take back what belongs to me." "You can't take him," I whispered, my voice trembling with fear, but Daniel's cold smile told me otherwise. "He's mine," he said, reaching out to take my son from my arms. I screamed and cried, pleaded with him. He was unmoved. I hurried to the mansion, begging at the gates, pleading for a glimpse of my son. "Please, let me see him," I cried out, my voice cracking with desperation. But my pleas fell on deaf ears. The guards, impassive and unyielding, turned me away every time. The loneliness of my situation weighed heavily on me. I had no friends, no family to turn to, just the echoes of my cries mingling with the wind. My only solace was the hope that somehow, someone might listen and grant me the chance to hold my son again. Yet, with each passing day, the possibility seemed to slip further away. After 3 days in the evening, as I sat in my small, dimly lit apartment, tears streaming down my face, a sudden knock on the door startled me. I opened it with trembling hands. To my utter shock, standing before me was Daniel. Gone were his imposing suits and the aura of authority he once carried. Without waiting for an invitation, Daniel stepped into my modest home. I stumbled backward in surprise, my heart racing as he closed the door behind him. Daniel looked at me with an expression of raw vulnerability. Before I could react, he moved towards me and, without warning, enveloped me in a tight embrace. The warmth of his body was a shocking contrast to the coldness I had come to expect. His shoulders shook with sobs, his grip trembling as he held me close. "I'm sorry," he choked out between cries. "I'm so sorry for everything I did to you. I've been such a fool. I never should have treated you like this." The words were like a balm to my wounded soul. I had never seen Daniel like this, broken, remorseful. For the first time, I felt a pang of sympathy for the man who had once been my tormentor. His tears fell onto my shoulder, mingling with my own. Pulled away slightly, his red eyes locking with mine, his expression filled with regret. Sarah left me again. She took Lily with her, my daughter. She revealed that I wasn't Lily's biological father, but Lily was mine, my life. I'd been betrayed by Sarah again. My mom died in pain, and I'm left alone. My son is the only one left for me in this world. That's why I wanted my son so desperately. But he cried all night and day. Then I realized the cruelty of what I've done. The revelation was like a heavy weight settling on my chest. The man who had caused me so much pain was now facing his own heartbreak. Daniel's voice wavered with a mix of grief and longing. "I'm sorry, Clara. I'm so sorry. My son is the only one I have left in this world now. I've been a fool, and I want to make things right." He allowed me to see my son in the mansion. I hugged my baby with tears streaming down my face. But when I was ready to leave, Daniel stopped me. "My son," he began, "is a part of me just as much as he is a part of you. I want him in my life. Please, Clara, don't keep him away from me." I allowed Daniel to visit our son, to be with him whenever he wanted. It was a decision I made for the sake of our child, though I made it clear that I didn't need his money to raise our son. "I can take care of my child on my own," I said firmly, determined to stand on my own 2 feet. To my surprise, Daniel did something I never expected. He sold everything he owned, the mansion, the luxury cars, the businesses, and donated all the money to a children's orphanage. It was money tainted by his past, and he wanted to cleanse himself of it. With empty hands and a heavy heart, he came back to me. "Clara, give me a chance, please," pleaded, his voice full of sincerity. Over the past year, I had seen a transformation in Daniel. He was no longer the cold-hearted man who once controlled my every move. Instead, he had become a loving father, devoted to our son. I watched as my son's eyes lit up whenever Daniel was around, and I couldn't deny the bond they shared. My resolve softened, and I finally agreed. We married again. I saw the change in him, the man he was trying to become for the sake of our son. Together, we opened a small coffee shop, a humble business where we could start anew. We left behind the dark shadows of our past and embraced a future built on trust, love, and the family we had created. Daniel became Danny to me. Our son had a beloved father. I saw a warm smile on Danny's face always, his once cold eyes now filled with happiness. As we worked side by side, serving customers and building our new life, I realized that the man standing beside me was not the same one who had once brought me so much pain. He was different now. Though I couldn't forget the past, I chose to forgive, for the sake of our son, and for the peace it brought us both. We started a new life, one that was far from perfect, filled with hope and the promise of a better tomorrow.